Good morning and welcome to everyone who has joined us so far from around the globe. I see people from many parts of the world already joining us. We've still got people joining as we are starting, but given the fact we have an hour, I think it's time we got going. I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Sharon Constanson. I'm Chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce. We have started a series of interviewing pertinent people to South Africa's economy and to the COVID crisis, and hearing varying views from different insights. And today we have another very interesting webinar ahead of us. What we're looking at is the focus of South Africa, its future, and how it's coping with the current pandemic. As the Chamber sitting here in the UK, we see a lot of South African initiatives that have been set up and started to help the people of the country, the feeling of Ubuntu, the feeling of people going the extra mile, and the initiatives that we are seeing developing between government and business. Things that I think even a few of us would recognize that decades ago would probably not have been possible. So it's very enlightening to see what is happening and what is improving in the country at the moment, given that we have a lot of issues to deal with. South Africa's created many kings and queens of business, true leaders that have stepped up over the decades in the change of South Africa and are the cornerstone of business and South Africa's survival. In a webinar I was on recently, there was a conversation, a bit of a laugh around how South Africa are strange people, that we will take things to the limit, we'll take everything to the edge. And interesting enough, title put forward by Bonang for today, yet we're an agile and resilient nation that we do bounce back from that cliff edge every single time. Here's an opportunity for South Africa again. It's like the world, the country is being tested. And today we will hear from Bonang Mohale, a businessman, a board member on many organizations, an author and a true leader of the country. And his views on business and that cliff edge, that business cliff edge, and how we are going to move through it. Bonang will be interviewed by well-renowned John Battersby, one of the founding members of the Chamber, but also currently is our longest-serving board member at the moment. He is a journalist, a wordsmith, and a person who draws pictures in your head. He's previously a country manager for Brand South Africa and currently chairman of Cannons Colin Trust, as well as being on the South African Chamber Board. And he was one of those few who met Mandela in those early moments as he came out of prison and into the free world. The format of this webinar will be an interview conversation style between John and Bonang to tease out some of the key understandings and issues that are facing South Africa and that critical business cliff edge that we are wishing to avoid. Please post questions and put them up in text on the Q&A panel. From there, we will pick them up and we'll pose the questions to Bonang. Where we've got multiple questions of a similar topic, we will be condensing them into one. We're expecting a large number of questions to be coming. You're not here to listen to me, so at this junction, I'm going to hand over to John and to Bonang. Welcome. Thanks very much.
Bonang, first of all, a very good morning to you, and thank you so much for being with us today. As Sharon has said, I'm John Battersby. I'm a director of the South African Chamber, and I'd like to wish a very warm welcome to everybody who is joining us today, and a special welcome to Bonang Mohale, who I'm now going to have the honor of briefly introducing, particularly for our participants from the UK. I know that Bonang is very well known in South Africa, and it's a pleasure to be doing this on the day after Youth Day, when we've all had time to reflect and think about the extraordinary things that have happened in our country over the past quarter century. So Bonang Mohale is currently the Chancellor of the University of the Free State. He's Professor of Practice at the Johannesburg Business School, College of Business. He's the author of a very inspiring book called Lift As You Rise. He's the chairman of Bidvest, one of South Africa's major companies, which has a annual revenue in the order of 77 billion rands. That's a global company, South African originated. And And of course, Bonang is also most recently known for his position as Chief Executive Officer of Business Leadership South Africa, which is a body which will come up in our conversation, which represents the major corporate companies in South Africa and deals with the dialogue with government and so forth. So, Bonang, to start off with, one often hears from informed commentators and analysts that South Africa's private sector is one of the real strengths of our country. It's vibrant, it's robust, and it's clearly an essential element in this process of ongoing transition and building a new economy. You've just come out of a position where you were interacting with all the major companies on a regular basis over the past couple of years. And I wondered, what is your sense about the strength and the role of our private sector in South Africa?
John, thank you very much, and good morning to all my other colleagues that have found the time in their busy schedule to come and have this conversation with us. So, John, in fact, I don't know what we could have done as the South African economy, as a people with great natural endowments, had it not been for the presence, the activities, the concern, but also the very present engagement by business. From the days when we went to the World Economic Forum and we realized that we have lost our shine, and business put aside the then Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, to say, this cannot continue, let's see what we can do. Then the CEO initiative was created. We identified 5 major topics to talk about to pull ourselves out of this quagmire. Up until today, where a new organization called Business for South Africa has been created, a loose organization of a number of entities to try and deal with the ravages of COVID-19. I've just been the CEO myself of Business Leadership South Africa, an organization that was founded in 1960, even before I was born, that was regularly having a conversation with this government, and we still continue those conversations even today. As we speak, it represents 86 CEOs of major companies, most of them listed on the JSE, out of the 400. John, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks very much, Bonang. And I'm glad you mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic, because that was really going to be my next question to you. Is the pandemic has you have mentioned on several occasions that the pandemic has exposed major structural flaws in the South African society, structural inequality, let's call it. And my question to you is, how can we simultaneously address these structural inequalities, which is a historical legacy, and at the same time be building a new economy and a new foundation on which to move forward?
So a society that laments more the loss of its economy than human life does not need a virus. It is already sick. So it's very sad that South Africa's timing could not have been worse. That initially we were already suffering from 9 wasted years of state capture. Secondly, we were already in a technical recession. Thirdly, Moody's, one of the 3 rating agencies, the only one that still kept us above investment grade, decided to downgrade us below investment grade. Now, COVID-19. All 4 things at the same time. But we have always understood, especially from the rest of the world, when we heard about COVID-19 on the 31st of December, even though it started really around the 8th of December in Wuhan in China. that we are really trying to balance two things here. One is, how do we suppress the contagion effect of the virus, i.e., how do we save lives? Secondly, how do we preserve livelihoods? So that we don't forget the magnitude and the impact of those infected and affected. This is worse than the 1912 Spanish flu, when you consider that it is probably only 4 months, and we're already talking about more than 8.3 million people that have been infected, 445,000 deaths, and the people that have recovered, probably around 4.4 million. But in South Africa, we had our index patient on the 5th of March. And in 3 months, we are now talking about 73,533 people that are infected, 1,568 that have already left us, and almost 39,867 that have recovered. So how then do we ensure that we deal with both? For us, it has always been both and together at the same time, not either or, simultaneously, concurrently, and in parallel. So first is how COVID-19 has changed everything. And let me go directly to the gross inequalities that it has exposed. When you consider that the 3 mitigation factors globally that have been spoken about and have been used to flatten the curve, as Dr. Anthony Fauci has now taught us. Number 1 is this notion of social distancing. Number 2, of self-quarantine. Number 3, of just good basic hygiene, washing your hands for more than 20 seconds. How then do you practice social distancing in South Africa, a country of 58.78 million people? So we are amongst friends, let's round it up and say 60 million people, where a majority of our people live in Soweto, 3.5 million people. Just to give you an idea, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland, each of those countries has a population less, let's say 2 million. 2 million. And officially we say in Soweto alone, there's 2.5 million people. Unofficially, we know it's 3.5 million. 4-roomed house, 2 bedrooms, an average of 5 people living in that 4-roomed house, and only 2 bedrooms. Impossible. Secondly, how do you practice social distancing in the most densely populated area called Alexander, just 4 kilometers across the bridge from the richest square mile, which is Sandton in the continent, where even the problem of running water is an issue. Lastly, how do you even wash your hands for 20 seconds when the majority of our schools and the majority of our rural areas don't even have running water? And of the schools that we have to deal with COVID-19, we are trucking in water, or we're putting in water containers. We call them JOJOs in South Africa. Lastly, how do you then say to people, go and work from home, when in South Africa, according to Stats SA, only 14.3% of South African households have direct connection to the internet, where in Sandton, the majority of our people will have multiple devices. In Soweto, you'll be lucky if you've got 1 cell phone, and if that cell phone is a smartphone. Therefore, as I conclude, if you were to say to your own employees today in South Africa, in this day, when so many of us dare to hope that joy and peace will prevail, here's a smartphone, here's a laptop, go and work from home in Soweto and Alexander. It is the shortest way of ensuring that as they get into taxis, because our public transport is not yet safe, accessible, and affordable, that smartphone and indeed the laptop is going to be confiscated. John.
Thank you very much, Bonang, and thanks for giving us that insight into the realities of South Africa and the impact that COVID has in a country like ours with vast disparities of socioeconomic levels and so forth. if we can come back to the role of business, there's a complex matrix of organized business in South Africa, which is not always easy for the outsider to understand. You've got Business Leadership South Africa, you've got Business for South Africa, you've got the BUSA, the umbrella body, you have Black Business Council, you have SACOP. But give us, without going into the details of these organizations, give us an insight into how business participated both in the response to the pandemic and now practically as the phases of the lockdown unfold, how has business performed as a stakeholder in that process? For instance, we've had briefings from the Solidarity Fund, so we've got an idea how that works. How is it unfolding in practice, and how is the relationship between business and government in that process?
So, John, before I speak about the structure of business in South Africa, let me tell you that Business for South Africa was formed specifically to deal with the ravages of COVID-19. So it has 7 working streams. Only 3 of them are core. This is healthcare, that is led by Stavros Nicolaou. It is the one that is looking at our economic response to this COVID-19, led by Martin Kingston. And then the third core one is about labor, led by Robert Lee. So the other 4 will be the one that deals, of course, with the communications, Phumzile Langeni and the CEO of BNSA, and the one that deals with legal, with regulatory, and with tax, that is led by Glenn Penfold. There's also the one that deals with the risk mitigation, because in good cooperative governance, you have to understand the issues of risk, not just the 4 control functions, that is led by Norman Mbazima. The last one is the one that deals with civil society, that is led by Nolita Fagude. And as part of those 7, we then said we need to put our money where our mouth is. Therefore, we created the Solidarity Fund as an outcome, as a program of Business for South Africa. So that is working very well. The first thing was to say, in declaring the national state of emergency on the 15th of March by the president, how can we respond as business? We said, no, we needed really to make sure that we procure PPE, that we have enough ventilators, that we have enough beds. And on the 26th of March, when the president announced on the 23rd of March to say there'll be a national lockdown, initially scheduled for 3 weeks, which ended up being 35 days, to say, can we use that time to really prepare ourselves and ensure a heightened state of readiness? There's an African adage that says, when sailor men and sailor women cannot go out to sea, they repair their nets. We were trying to repair our nets to make sure that when we are hit by the peak of this pandemic, that indeed we've got enough hospital beds dedicated just to COVID-19. But remember that we have the highest infection rate of HIV/AIDS. The majority of our people still die from tuberculosis. And then how do we deal with those almost in parallel? And also that we've got just sufficient PPEs, because we knew that the whole world was needing this. So lastly, let me talk a little bit about the structure of business. I was very blessed that when we were led by our first democratically elected President Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, he came to us. At that time, I was with the Black Management Forum to say there's 127 business organizations. I only have 220 working days in a year. How do I go back to the electorate to say I've consulted with business, I've consulted with labor, and then as government, here's what we're going to do. Later on, we added, of course, civil society. He took all of these organizations. At that time, Deputy President Thabo Mbeki was the leader of business. He took us to Skukuza, and we deliberated over the weekend. Only 18 of us were asked to come back 3 weeks later to another camp called Mopani, where we came out with a 3-pager called the Mopani Memorandum of Understanding. This is what gave rise to Business Unity South Africa as the foremost pinnacle representative body, hence Business Unity. So the whole of business was united under this. But also we took all the chambers of commerce together like this one, and we said all of these chambers, they will be led by Patrice Motsepe as the president, and we also made him the president of Business Unity South Africa, so that you have this singularity of purpose, unitary voice that we can speak about. And since then, I can tell you that we have always been meeting with this ANC-led government at least once a quarter as Sefako Presidential Guest House to talk about these 5 work streams and to talk about how we can grab the rest of South Africa by the scruff of its neck and put it center stage in the global arena that is rapidly globalizing, but where if we are not careful, we are going to lose our shine, because nobody invests in your country because they feel sorry for you. They will invest because they are looking at return on investment, they're looking at impact. Lastly, John, what then is the role of business in the 21st century? In short, I think if we can survive COVID-19, we would have already made a profit. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much, Bonang. That's really interesting. You're a great advocate of leadership, the importance of leadership, of people development, and of collective collaboration. How do you see, from your point of view, achieving these goals going forward? And perhaps you can give us a bit of an insight. I know that some weeks ago, when we spoke, you had just you were actually in a meeting with the president in your role in the tourism industry. Give us a little bit of an insight into what goes on, because we know that the president is very strong on consultation with all the different business groups and all the different sectors of business and industry. You went there in your capacity as a player in the tourism industry, obviously very concerned about the impact that the lockdown is going to have on the tourism, hospitality and travel industry. Give us a little bit of an insight into how the president would allay your fears at that meeting.
So, at an order of magnitude, after the business has survived, not by the way maximizing shareholder returns as we are taught in Ivy League universities, the second role of business is to bring about this notion called shared value. How do we ensure that the biggest challenge confronting business today is to ensure that corporate decision-making is consistent not only with the whims of the shareholders, but also considering the broader stakeholder community. The third is to ensure that business does no harm. It sounds passive, but you owe it to all your employees that they come to work safe, but they go back to their significant others absolutely safe, with 10 fingers on at the end of both of their hands. Fourthly, something much more active is how do we make the world a better place? Because it can be that your own employees cannot afford the products and services that you provide. Clearly, there is a problem. When we say business create jobs, actually what business is doing is to create the market of the future. Because if people are not working, they will not be able to buy and indeed afford the products and services that we produce. Lastly, it's about saying, how do we grow our own timber? It's not up to government to give us the skills that we require for the fourth industrial revolution. We need to be in the forefront of saying, we can understand what is coming at us, therefore what are those skills that are going to be needed. So we meet with the president on a regular basis. The last one was to say to him, national lockdown has happened. It lasted 35 days. Look at what it looks like on paper. Secondly, you have opened up some industries in level 4 after 35 days, but that is mute when you can't deal with the issues of the supply chain. When you look at all the raw materials that South Africa needs just to produce its own pharmaceuticals, and there are 2 companies that are producing locally, but all the raw materials come from China. We've got Russell hops just for kettles in the middle of winter to warm up your water to make tea, but the element that you need to heat up the water also come from China. A lot of countries like Japan are saying, you know what, we need to bring back manufacturing from China back into Japan, and therefore they've given an incentive of 1.2 billion US dollars as an incentive to those companies that are located in China to come and bring their manufacturing in Japan. China responds on the other hand by saying, you know what, anybody that buys goods and products that are made in China, each of them will be given 35,000 US dollars. What has been our response? We also announced economic recovery of 500 billion South African rands. But unfortunately, we don't have the 500 billion. Firstly, we are hoping that we will do some juggling, shift expenditure from what was already budgeted for to this economic stimulus. Number two, we know that we have to go back to the South African Reserve Bank, National Treasury, and then lastly, of course, we have to go and borrow from the IMF and the World Bank, something that we've resisted up until now. And when you look at our matrices, you see that they are now trending downwards rather than upwards where we actually want them. So we will now have to be hugely borrowed. Lastly, when we went to the president, we said, not only is the issues of the supply chain, but how do you bring resilience into this economy? Because resilience, especially in Africa, it's much more than the food, energy, water nexus. So when you move from level 5 to level 4, you open some industries, mining, etc. But if people can't fly there, they can't sleep over, they can't eat, they can't have cooked food, etc. In fact, you limit the impact even of that level, stage 4. So we estimated at that time that our own economy was going to be reduced by about 10.4%. That up to 7 million people are going to be unemployed. That will kill 10 times more people through hunger and starvation than through the virus itself. Lastly, we then said, instead of putting tourism industry, because remember, it is car hires, it is casinos, it is gambling, it is the tourism sector, it is the hotels, it is the lodges, it is hunting, it is nature, it is hiking, it is trails, all of them into one. Instead of putting them at level 2, we are requesting you kindly that if we can demonstrate to you that we are exceeding the health protocols, can you bring tourism sector from level 2 to level 3 so that indeed they can be considered? And then lastly, so that by the time we get to an enhanced level of level 3, that we can look at interprovincial travel, that we can look at sit-down restaurants again, of course, considering that we are already committing that we are going to not only comply, but to exceed the health protocols, that we are now going to also look at the personal industry, the people that do your nails, your hair, your barbers, etc. Because these are the people that are really responsible for small and medium enterprises. And we know that where jobs are created in large numbers, because our BRICS counterparts create 60% of new jobs through SMEs, and South Africa is languishing at below 15 percentage points. So the president, we found him to be very cordial, to be very listening. He genuinely gets it. Because let me tell you, John, this is the best president we've ever had after Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, because he initially was the Secretary General of the National Union of Mine Workers. He's a lawyer by training. He became a politician for a short while. He then sulked and went to business, and he's not too poor, to put it mildly. And he's the one who gave us actually our constitution together with Rolf Meyer, 1996. They gave it to President Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela to say, sign it. That's why we can brag and say we've got the best constitution in the world, because we begged, borrowed, and stole from absolutely the best. John.
Thank you very much, Bonang, for sharing those insights and also into the nature of the leadership of the president of the country. That's really very helpful. I want to come now to the question of the state-owned enterprises, which, if one looks at the challenges facing South Africa post the pandemic, in fact, they were challenges before the pandemic, as we've seen from Eskom and SAA and so forth. Looking at the state-owned enterprises, we've now seen that the president has recently appointed a high-level panel to deal with the restructuring of these state-owned enterprises. What do you see as the way out of this kind of syndrome of the debt trap, where you actually, your debts are building up at many of these state-owned enterprises faster than you can actually create any wealth? So how does one avoid that debt trap, and what do you see as the role of public-private partnerships in resolving these issues?
John, what has happened to our state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies is sad, tragic, and regrettable, because the 340 years of colonialism, the 98 years of separate development, and the 48 years of apartheid have taught us that especially the apartheid government has used SOEs not only as a crucible for electorates, but also to prepare and create skills. Ordinary plumbers and fitters, artisans, lift mechanics, electricians have been trained in companies like Spoornet, Transnet, South African Airways. Today we call it Transnet in general. And it is also an amazing vehicle for creating your own small and medium enterprises, so that you can really buttress the effect of the economy and these major pandemics that are hitting us. So we were gifted with more than 740 SOEs when we went to the votes on the 27th of April, 1994. Imagine for a moment if, say, 750 of these SOEs, we had put in Black CEOs and women CEOs for a minimum of just 5 years each. You multiply that by the 750 SOEs. Today we'll be talking about more than 70,000 highly experienced CEOs, managing directors, presidents with a demonstrable track record. But sadly, when you look at South Africa today, 26 years into democracy, we can't look anywhere at some depth and breadth of demonstrable skills and track record of people that we ourselves have trained. The majority of MDs and CEOs that we depend on, like myself, were actually trained by the private sector when we had the most amazing opportunity to really focus on what we can do. But here's the sad thing. The 9 wasted years that we talk about, it's not just a number for us. We estimate that in just 4 years, we lost 1.5 trillion South African rands to this project of state capture, industrial scale looting, where the people that were in power at that time simply said it's our turn to eat too, that we didn't go to politics to be poor. In the 9 years, we estimate that we've been siphoning off just to 2 Zupta families an average of 100 billion South African rands a year, every year. Imagine how many schools would have built, how many hospitals, how many pit latrine toilets would have eliminated, how many of our own kids would have educated, when the target is to have 1.5 million of our children in institutions of higher learning through universities, 26 of them, but also the 90 TVET colleges. Lastly, we now look at what we have done in the last 26 years and say, look at the wastage that has happened. This morning, we woke up to the news that out of the Solidarity Fund, almost 1.5 billion of it has been stolen by the Eastern Cape government. That out of the 430 million that was given to this government to provide housing for the poor, not for white male Afrikaners, for their own people, not even a single house was built. That the IDT, the CDC, and the National Treasury of the Eastern Cape themselves saw it fit to go and buy luxury vehicles, and they've got nothing to show for it. And I think that investigation needs to be allowed to take its course. Lastly, as we went to the World Economic Forum during the 50th birthday and its anniversary, it was Richard Quest who said, I don't take South Africans seriously anymore. You actually have been talking about state capture for the last 10 years, but 10 years later, not one person has been sent to jail. Back to you, John.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Bonang. For the last question, I'd like to just turn to the international dimension, and particularly the relationship between South Africa and the UK, which is also got a lot of questions over it still, because we're in the kind of interim phase here with Brexit, and technically Britain has left the European Union, but there's a transition period. And that only concludes at the end of this year. And then one has the prospect of bilateral trade agreements being negotiated between the UK and various countries, including, of course, South Africa. What do you see as the prospect, and what role can the South African Chamber here in the UK, which is really our mission here, is to try and oil the wheels of trade and investment between the two countries in order to help raise that investment that is so needed in South Africa. What do you see as the potential role that we can play here, and what benefits and opportunities do you see coming out of the Brexit issue?
So first of all, I think the UK could help South Africa greatly, because up until today, the UK is still our biggest trading partner, more than the US of A, even though the US of A is the biggest economy in the world, but not for long. China is creeping up very quickly in investing in Africa and in South Africa. And of course, they want to reclaim the #1 spot because they've been there before. And they can help by just internalizing and accepting that our single biggest, both systemic and systematic risk is Eskom. This national utility that is a monopoly responsible for the generation of electricity, because electricity is the fourth means of production, the first being land, and I'll come back to that. Eskom owes 450 billion South African rands. Over the last 3 years has benefited from 128 billion of cumulative bailouts. It means that Eskom on its own is unable to trade itself out of this debt. It is now in a debt crisis, in a death spiral, and it cannot survive without outside help. The South African government itself today is actually technically bankrupt when you consider our assets and liabilities and the commitments we have made to the 740 SOEs and SOCs. But if you just look at the top 6, being Eskom, SAA, Denel, and Transnet, you see that we are heavily indebted. But secondly, I think there's an opportunity to say, as we break up Eskom into 3, generation, distribution, and indeed the last piece be bundled together as enterprises. Are there opportunities for UK companies and for UK utilities to say, let's come and partner with South Africa now, whilst it's still at its lowest ebb, so that when the lifting tide comes up, then we can realize extraordinary returns on investments. Lastly, as I referred briefly to the issue of land, when the UK is being lobbied by AfriForum and Solidarity to say the South African government is killing farmers, just to recognize that South Africa has a crime issue, period. And the majority of people that are killed are actually Africans. And the majority of those that are killed are actually the poor. We kill on average 53 people a day, every day. This has just gone up to about 57, not just the farm murders. So we have a murder problem, and we should really try and rise above when looking at some of these self-interests that are not in the best interest of South Africa, Inc. So today we speak about land expropriation without compensation, which is already, by the way, in our constitution, in section 23, article 3A, because it says when conditions of fair and equitable have been adequately demonstrated, then compensation can be down to 0. That our bigger problem, it's actually not expropriation without compensation. Our bigger problem is land reform. Because in land reform, there are three issues. Number one is land restitution. How do we make sure that we restore the ownership of this land to its original indigenous people? Because they were forcibly removed from District 6 and indeed from Manenberg and indeed in KwaDugatole. And that those are restored to its original owners. Secondly, it's a land redistribution, because we know that 90% of the population has been squashed into 13% of the land. Clearly, this is not sustainable. It has to be distributed equally amongst all. Lastly, it's about land development. For what purpose and to whom? Because the biggest holders of land, it's actually not in the private sector, it's actually government, but also the army. If this government were to give title deeds only to the 2.5 million residents of Soweto on Tuesday, on Wednesday, they'll be able to leverage that and be able to start their own small and medium enterprises. That's how you get the economy indeed going. Because there was a study that was done to demonstrate that in 1960, the people of Soweto, especially in Orlando, had already paid fourfold for the value of their four-roomed houses. Therefore, they should be given these houses and be given title deeds, not because we feel sorry for them, because they've paid 4 times for the value of these houses, so that we can get a little bit of stability. Because if people have nothing to lose, then they will ban the only fire engine that serves the 2 townships, knowing that at 2 in the morning, their significant other might want to go to hospital in labor. There's an African adage, as I end, John, that says, when the child does not feel enveloped by the village, that child will burn down the village in order to feel its warmth. What we're witnessing today is we are not collectively succeeding in taking the bottom half and bringing them into the middle class so that they too have something to lose. All of us have not collectively succeeded in eradicating the legacy of apartheid. In South Africa, you just have to be born black, and the chances are you are destined to live in an informal settlement of Alexander. You are born white, and the chances are you are destined for a bigger fate in the leafy suburbs of Bryanston. And all that we are saying is we need to change the narrative that says poverty today, 26 years into democracy, still has primarily a black and feminine face. And yet we know that when we put a smartphone in the hands of women, not only does the health, nutrition, and education of their own children improve, but of the broader society and the community from which they come. Lastly, I think for the UK businesses to see opportunities in public-private partnerships. The first PPP in healthcare under Schedule 16 is in Nkosi Alubele to the Central Hospital, 850-bed hospital, where the government is paying 15 million a month to provide 43 services. In total, that's 30 million. That's 360 million per year. And there are opportunities. There's 5 PPPs in the country. There's 9 provinces. There's almost 59 million of us in education, in healthcare, in services, but just in the hustle and bustle of business. The opportunities are truly too great to ignore. And by the way, South Africa is a gateway to the rest of the continent, because when we talk about Africa, we talk about 1.3 billion people that speak 2,000 languages, 55 countries that have a combined GDP of $6 trillion US, the biggest economy today being Nigeria at 420 billion, South Africa at 350. 3 of the biggest rivers in the world are found here, including the mighty Zambezi. So we can do some hydroelectric power, we can do wind in East London and PE. That's why they're called the windy cities. This is the only country in the world where the sun shines more than 234 days in a year, and yet the world authorities on solar are not Africans, but Germany, that has more than 3 months, less than 3 months of sunshine. This is truly God's own country, and the opportunities are truly incredible. Thank you, John.
Bonang, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure and a privilege talking to you, and we really appreciate your time and the insights that you've given us into the challenges and opportunities in South Africa, and particularly the role that we are able to play from here as South Africans living outside of the country. I'm going to hand you back now to our chair, Sharon Constanson, who has been collating the questions that have been coming in, and she will put those questions to you, and all the very best.
Thank you, John. Wonderful set of questions, and to you, Bonang, a wonderful set of insights that we have received. To the audience, please use the Q&A line as much as you want to. So we've got some questions for Bonang. We've got a bit of time still, so we can continue. First question I'd like to cover, please, Bonang, and it's been brought up in a number of different guises, and I know you have spoken to this topic to a degree. But what is the role that energy can have at bringing the country out of poverty? Now, obviously, Eskom is an aspect of that energy. You spoke a moment ago about the Windy City. I couldn't help but smile because I remember a few occasions being blown across roads, in Cape Town included. There's a green and there is a solar, there's wind, there's water, all the other aspects, sunshine that you spoke about. How could energy change the outcome for the average South African?
Sharon, thank you very much. I said it's the fourth means of production. Every day, we learn that of almost the 8 billion people that are in the globe now, more than 1.4 billion of them have absolutely no form of access to energy whatsoever. 624 million of them are in Africa. No wonder we are called the dark continent. It has implications for issues of sustainability, but also the environment, because the majority of these people, especially in rural areas, wake up every morning, they go to the forest to chop a few trees, to bring them home, just so that they can boil the water, so that their kids can get washed to go to school and their parents go to work. Clearly, it's not sustainable. The opportunity is here because there's 16 million people that are gainfully employed in South Africa, who are supporting 18 million who are on social security. So the math doesn't add up. But if you look at it, South Africa is not really a poor country. It is in the developing country, it's a middle income country. Because again, if you do the math, roughly, we round it upwards and say there's 60 million of us, but every year for the last 10 years, South African Revenue Services collects 1.4 trillion South African rands. You divide that, you say there is no reason for anybody to go to bed hungry. So anybody that can invest in energy today is assured, guaranteed of above average return on investments. Mm-hmm. The reason why it's important in South Africa is because up until now, we have really been using coal-fired power stations, which is reaching a sunset, not only because of the environmental issues, but also because there are newer forms of energy. We learned that the Stone Age did not stop because men ran out of stone. The Stone Age stopped and ended because men found innovative and new ways of dealing with today's problems. So the sun here is free. There's no reason why we are not world authorities on solar energy. And out of that, with a little bit of inverter technology, we can store this energy during the day and be able to unleash it at night. There's households today that are totally off the grid. They run on 147 panels on their roofs. This is the size of a factory that can be powered by this energy. And then at night, these batteries then power the entire energy needs of that small factory. Secondly, I said there's wind here. The technology in solar has now only been surpassed by wind energy, especially up in the mountains, but also in the middle of the ocean. This force, this impetus, this energy can be harnessed to provide electricity. The third is water, hydroelectric power. We're blessed with good rivers, the Victoria Falls. At the point where they pummel down into the precipice, we're talking about 435 million cubic meters of water per second. That's enough to generate electricity for 1.3 billion people in Africa and still have an access to export to Europe. Lastly, it's about saying, are there opportunities in renewables? We are world authorities having started with phase 1, which came in at about 4 rand per kilowatt hour. Today, we are talking at less than 60 cents per kilowatt hour on independent power producers, where companies can produce their own renewable energy, sell it back to the state, it gets plugged into the grid. Most mines can easily produce their own energy for their own needs, but also for their own workers and employees, and in the hostels where people live, but also in the small villages that they've created. Because when we grew up, the best facilities were in mines, the best hospitals, the best sporting facilities, but also the best showers happened to be in the mines. There's no reason why we can't resuscitate that. It's not corporate social investment. It is good business sense because the returns are truly extraordinary. Sharon.
Thank you very much, Bonang. There have been a number of statements in the question series thanking you very much for your insights and the learnings and the candidness by which you are speaking. One of the things I'd like to put forward to you is the title of this talk was about South Africa going to the business cliff edge. We've talked about South Africa being resilient and being agile. What are maybe 3 pointers we can guide business with or investment with as to what will be the key drivers that are going to bring South Africa away from that cliff edge and into successful economic return?
You know, on a practical level, I think we need to embark on a very deep structural reforms. We also need to ensure that we embark on some very serious austerity measures. 2008-2009 financial year, the public sector wage bill was 250 billion. Today, it's approaching 600 billion. Eskom 2010 had 32,000 employees. Today, they've got 48,000. With restructuring, it's coming down to 46,000. Because in state capture, we use this for our friends that go and work there, not acting in the best interest of the country. So if I say to you, imagine that our interest rate is 8% and CPI is 4%. This is crude mathematics. The emphasis is on crude, not on mathematics. It means that the GDP must grow by 4 percentage points, at least, to ensure that we're not standing still or in fact going backwards. But what has been the reality in the last 6 years? We've been growing at less than 3 percentage points. In the last 48 months, we're not touching 2 percentage points. In the last 10 years, we have not grown by what the NDP 2030, which is our economic vision, say we need to grow by 4.4% in order to absorb the 180,000 young graduates that get onto the job market, often with inappropriate skills. So we need to grow the GDP by a minimum of 4%. We need to auction the 5G spectrum. For 10 years, we've been talking about digital migration. 5 ministers of communication later, we still have not done it. Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland will have 5G before South Africa does. If we auction the spectrum, today is Wednesday, on Thursday, by Friday we could bank 20 billion South African rands because 3 major telco companies are desperate for this 5G spectrum. We need to reactivate the next round of renewable energy. That's what I spoke about. But we need to fast track the infrastructure in public-private partnerships. Because you see, the private sector can spell project management, how to deliver major projects on time, on budget, and in full. The government can't do that. Every single solitary one of our major projects have quadrupled in costs have more than doubled in terms of duration. Midu, Bikusile, Ingula, all three of them budgeted at 30 billion, each one of them above 50 billion, apart from just the bribery, stealing and cheating at Transnet, where in buying 1,064 locomotives, budgeted at about 35 billion, we've paid 53 billion, 16 billion more, and yet nobody has gone to jail. And the evidence is there on paper. I think we also need to ensure that we restore the effectiveness of tax collection. SARS used to be amongst the top 5 revenue collection agencies in the world, from the ruins of 4 separate departments during apartheid. They've lost that, that ability deliberately, purposefully, and intentionally by the state capture miscreants, because they wanted to cut it on its knees. From tobacco alone and from alcohol, what we have lost out in tax revenue in just 3 months is 250 billion, which now reflects as a shortfall from the revenue collection. We need to clamp down hard on tax evasion. We need to act as patriotic South Africans. We need to sell some of our assets. There's no reason why we're owning assets like SAA. It's a vanity project. We don't need it. Airlines will be able to fly here. People will be able to fly to Cape Town and indeed Durban. It doesn't need to be on the national airline. Had we sold SAA only 3 years ago to Emirates or to Qatar, that what we have seen is where we have now bailed it out to the tune of 20 billion. The business rescue practitioners need another 5 billion before they wind it down. The Minister of Public Enterprise said, no, we have to create a new SAA from the ruins of the old SAA, this almost 97-year-old entity. I think it's a pipe dream because we don't have the political will to take the difficult actions. Lastly, I think we need to increase the tax base. Most economies in the world, when you look at their structure, they're almost diamond-shaped. A small minority on top that are the super rich, a small at the bottom that are the ones that are languishing in the self-perpetuating vicious cycle of abject poverty, but a huge bulging middle class to be able to support this. In South Africa, that structure is a triangle, a huge base of unemployed people and who are dependent on the state. 50% of the population lives below the poverty datum line. The majority of young people, 10 million of them, are not in employment, education, or training. When we look at the population of Gauteng, it's 9.6 million people. So we have exactly the same people unemployed as the entire population of Gauteng, and that Gauteng contributes probably 30% to the national GDP, followed by Durban at 18%, and then the Western Cape at 16%. But when you look at the two, you'll think that the Western Cape is the second biggest. Durban is the second biggest. Back to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much. They say that you should always end on a high. We've run out of time literally already. There are some questions that have not been asked, and I apologize to participants who've not had their questions posed. Some of them and the topics have been covered in what you spoke about earlier. I'd like to thank the audience for being with us. We had a good number of people from a large number of places in the world. Bonang, you've given us some tremendous insights, and we thank you for your frank and forthright approach to the questions that have been posed to you. John, thank you very much for the depth of your questioning. You are definitely a wordsmith. In summing up, there are a couple of key points that I noted that sort of stood out to me doing my fancy mind maps, is the multiple double whammies that South Africa is having to deal with. COVID is affecting the world. South Africa has a number, and you alluded to all of them, that are causing us extreme strain from beforehand and now during this problem. I think you gave us some good insights into some of the potential solutions for Eskom, and particularly more so in a greater context, energy. And you've covered the part that I found interesting, the resilience and agility of South Africa, its people and its business. And what we look forward to seeing is the likes of yourselves as true leaders is to bring South Africa Business South Africa to actually drive our economy and to support the government in doing things that they are, as you said, not in a position to do because they are government. Thank you all very much. This has been really, really interesting. We have a full calendar of webinars ahead over the period to follow. And hopefully, Bonang, you might be able to come and share some words with us again in the post-COVID world, where we are seeing business starting to generate and pull us away from the cliff edge. So I'd like to see a slightly different title next time. We have our lightning talks tomorrow, and on Friday we are launching work that we are doing in some fundraising for helping people outside of South Africa to raise funds for the Solidarity Fund in support of helping the people in South Africa. And that will be launched by a really innovative half hour of the anthem being sung by some very, very well-known South African artists. And we're encouraging everyone to join us for that symbol of solidarity through our anthem. And then we've got some more business people following up beyond that. We have a good list of people who are doing things for the average person, people who are doing it within business, and people who are doing it within partnerships with government. So thank you very much all for attending, and most importantly to John and to Bonang, thank you very, very much. I wish the hour weren't up yet. It's been really, really enjoyable. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to my colleagues.
Thank you to everybody. Greatly enjoyed it. And John, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Bonang.
Thanks, dear John.